I was 59 years old, and after losing my husband years ago, loneliness had enveloped me. But for some time now, I had felt a change in me. A desire, a passion that I had thought was long lost, was awakening. One Wednesday morning, as the city was bathed in the golden light of the sun, birds were chirping, and the scent of blooming flowers filled the air. The silence in my house was filled with the traces of lost time. To fill the emptiness within me, I decided to go outside. As I passed the neighborhood community center, a poster caught my eye. Pilates classes. Every Monday and Wednesday when my eyes caught the poster, I signed up with a feeling inside. I wanted to fill the empty hours, find some peace, and perhaps regain some lost vitality. The first few classes didn't live up to my expectations. The room was filled with the creaking joints of the elderly, and the atmosphere was heavy. But one Wednesday, Dave walked in, the new neighbor in our town. His dark brown hair and deep gaze immediately caught my attention. His body had a natural but striking charm, and his demeanor exuded calm. It was as if time slowed down around him and he somehow captivated me. At first, he was just another face in the room, maybe just another body. But I found myself watching his every move, noticing how his muscles worked fluidly, and how, if I couldn't quite reach the depth of his eyes, they seemed to offer me a mysterious world. Many things had changed in my life, but I hadn't expected anything from him. Yet every time I went to Pilates, I found myself searching for something beyond the movements. In my mind, everything seemed more alive. His presence added color to my life. Even the clothes I wore began to change. I began to pay more attention to every detail, to every touch. But deep down, I knew it was really just a desire to get his attention. One day, after class, as we were rolling up our mats, I gathered my courage and decided to approach him. "You're new here, right?" I asked. Fighting back my excitement, my voice came out as calm and gentle as I could manage. He turned his eyes towards me, and for a moment, his attention didn't leave me. "Yes," he said, smiling. "I moved here a couple of weeks ago. I'm Dave Bennett." I held out my hand, and he shook it firmly. His hands were warm and reassuring, and for a moment it felt like the whole world had stopped. "Welcome to town," I said. Our conversation began naturally. We talked about the town, his new job, and I told him stories about my garden and old memories. He was so charming, and with every word he spoke, I felt something draw me to him, but it didn't feel like just a friendly neighbor. Something was changing, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what it was. One day, I felt it was time for a change. That day, I wore a delicate dress that hugged my body. The dress accentuated my curves and at the same time had a touch that reminded me of my freedom. I had always been a curvy woman, but that day I felt completely different, with a whole new perspective. It was the perfect time to present myself in a more graceful and defined way. Dave watched closely. His eyes moved over my body, following every move. I noticed the slight movement of his Adam's apple as he swallowed. At the end of the Pilates class, he approached me and his eyes never left me. "You look different today," he said, his voice deep, as if he had a secret. I smiled, feeling the warmth of excitement inside me. "I just felt a little more stylish today," I said, shrugging slightly. He nodded, his eyes scanning my body again, then paused for a moment. "Would you like to get some coffee?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. My heart began to race, but I tried to remain calm. "Yes, I'd love to," I replied. My eyes were eager, wanting to see him a little closer. The next day, we decided to meet at a cafe with outdoor seating overlooking the town square. "Your garden must be beautiful," he said, his eyes meeting mine for a moment. "I often see you out there." "Yes, it's my pride and joy," I replied, smiling. "Maybe one day I can show it to you," I added, wanting to share something deeper with him. As he took a sip of his coffee, his eyes never left mine. "I'd like that very much," he murmured. As our conversation continued, the pauses between words began to carry more weight. Every time our hands brushed against each other on the table, we felt closer. Our knees touched lightly under the table. As evening approached and fewer people remained in the cafe, the sun cast a golden glow over everything. "I think I should go," he said, his voice dropping reluctantly. "But I had a really nice time." "Me too, thanks," I said, trying to hide the impatience in my voice. "Thanks for the coffee." He stood and held out his hand to help me. I took it firmly, and our eyes locked. For a moment I thought he might lean in for a kiss, but instead he gently squeezed my hand and said, "It was my pleasure, Lily. I'll see you at Pilates tomorrow." I lowered my head slightly, the warmth of his hand still echoing in my fingers, and then he quickly pulled away. "See you tomorrow," I said, trying to hide the tremble in my voice as I watched his figure walk away. As the days passed, our meetings became more frequent. We exchanged a few words after each Pilates class, and then walked together through the park in the town square, diving into deeper conversations as time went on. Most of what we talked about was simple, but somehow there was a tension in every moment. Our feelings seemed on the verge of surfacing at any moment. At night, his words, his smile, the feel of his hands would linger in my mind. One day, while tending to the flowers in my garden, the moment came. "I've always wanted to see this garden," he said, smiling softly, his eyes not on the garden, but directly on me. For a moment I felt uncomfortable, but I quickly composed myself. "These are just some flowers," I said, gesturing to the lavender and rose beds around me. He looked around the garden, but never took his eyes off me. "Really beautiful," he said, his voice full of admiration. "It takes real talent to do this." We walked side by side, our steps blending together on the stone-paved path, silently observing each other. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, the shadows grew longer and deeper, and the air seemed to settle over us like a heavy blanket. I could feel his presence in every moment, as if the world existed only for the two of us, in a moment when everything had stopped. "Thank you," I said, my voice almost a whisper, delicate and refined. Suddenly, he was right beside me. He gently adjusted a strand of hair that had fallen and moved a little closer. His touch was as light as a breeze, but it stirred something deep inside me. I turned my eyes to him, my heart racing. "Everything seems brighter, more alive when I'm with you," he said, his voice both soft and sure. At that moment, I felt that everything was about to change, that I had reached a turning point in my life. My face flushed, and as my eyes involuntarily closed, the silence between us grew thicker, filled with the expectation of a kiss. "Dave," I whispered softly, but he placed his finger on my lips, silencing me. "Just listen," he said, his eyes reading me like an open book. There was a stillness in the air, as if time itself had stopped. I could feel his breath on my skin, but the kiss never came. Instead, he gently pulled away, noticing something in my hair and carefully brushing it aside. "There's a bug in your hair," he said calmly. I opened my eyes, momentarily stunned and a little disappointed. Instead of the kiss I was expecting, he was just concentrating on removing a bug. I didn't want him to feel bad, but I felt a pang of sadness. I smiled faintly and said, "Thank you," still trying to hide the blush on my face. After examining the tiny creature, he released it. "I should thank the woman who makes the city more beautiful," he said, smiling, though the depth in his eyes hadn't faded. The air between us had thickened, and it felt as if we might draw even closer at any moment. "I have to go," he said, breaking the silence that had settled between us. "I have to get something." My heart started to feel the weight of reality. I had sensed that something was beginning, but perhaps it was only a fleeting moment. For a moment, all my emotions were awakened, but I quickly composed myself, trying not to let the disappointment show in my voice. "Of course," I said, forcing a smile. "I'll see you tomorrow." He nodded with a slight smile. "I'm really looking forward to it," he said, quickening his pace as he walked away. I followed his every step with my eyes as he moved. The way his pants clung to his waist, the lines of his body shaped by every movement, affected me deeply. At that moment, a longing, a desire arose in me. I wanted to be lost in his arms, to feel his lips, to relive my youth. The night was long and discouraging. I felt alone and lost in my house. I wandered from room to room, embracing the emptiness. I made myself a cup of coffee in the kitchen, but the warmth did little to chase away the coldness that had settled inside me. As the stars began to twinkle in the night sky, my thoughts drifted elsewhere. I thought of every moment with him, his deep gaze, and how he had brought life back into me. Among the chirping of the birds, hope began to grow in me that tomorrow might be different. Maybe, just maybe, this time there would be more than just a bee. The next day, I was filled with a tense anticipation. In Pilates class, my eyes kept searching for him. In the crowd, when I finally saw him, my heart suddenly raced. He had noticed me, too. His gaze was focused on me, but I couldn't muster the courage to respond to it. At the end of class, as we were rolling up our mats, Dave approached and whispered in my ear, "Would you like to go out tonight?" My words got caught, almost drowning in the mix of excitement. "Yes," I managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. His smile sent a wave of warmth through me. "Around 7?" he asked, walking slowly toward the door. The time that followed felt like an eternity, each minute dragging on. Inside me, impatience and confusion were swirling together. When choosing what to wear, I looked for something elegant, yet seductive. Something that screamed I was still alive, still here. As I applied my makeup, my hands trembled, wishing for everything to be perfect. When I arrived at Dave's house, my heart was pounding. The soft light from the porch lamp illuminated the steps to the door. I paused for a moment, took a deep breath, and hesitated before ringing the doorbell. But at that moment, the door swung open, and there he was, wearing a simple yet stylish shirt and pants. He invited me inside, and I began to explore the space. The house exuded a warm and inviting atmosphere, with shelves full of books and papers scattered around. The scent of something delicious wafted from the kitchen. "I hope you like fish," he said, leading me to the dining table. During the meal, we laughed and chatted in an atmosphere where the candlelight softly illuminated the room. Our conversation felt natural, as if we had known each other for years. But that tension, that special feeling, never left. The sound of utensils clinking and the melody playing in the background seemed to form a silent symphony. As we finished dessert, the atmosphere shifted. From across the table, he took my hand. His fingers lightly traced circles on my skin. My heart began to race, my blood spreading, warming my cheek. "Lily," he said, his voice full of emotional intensity, "I need to tell you something." My heart was fluttering in my chest, my breathing labored. "What?" I said, my voice shaky. Dave scanned my face with his eyes and focused his gaze on me. "I think about you all the time," he said. "I know, it's crazy, the age difference and everything, but there's something about you." His voice trailed off, and for a moment I had a sudden feeling of dizziness. You see, I didn't expect that. Something exploded inside me. I reached a point where I couldn't take it anymore. I silenced him by putting my hand on his lips, and without a moment's hesitation I moved towards him and kissed him passionately. That kiss was full of years of longing and loneliness. "I'm here," he seemed to be saying. "I'm still alive and I want you." His eyes opened in surprise, then closed quickly. He placed his hands behind my head and pulled me closer. When his lips met mine, a fire began to burn inside me. Flames engulfed me, and I surrendered to him. The kiss became deeper, more urgent. In the warm light of the lounge, the flickering light of the candles burned like stars trapped in the glass. He slid his hand up my upper arm, leaving a fiery imprint on my skin. My heart beat faster, the sound echoing in my ears, drowning out the light jazz music playing in the background. Finally, we pulled apart, both of us panting and staring at each other in silence. There was a hush, but everything hung in the air, something new and unrevealed, raw and out of control. "Lily," Dave said, his voice hoarse, looking at me with a kind of wonder and need in his eyes. "Something I didn't expect," he continued. "I know," I said, putting my finger to his lips. "I want this, Dave. I want to live again, feeling it." Dave stood up and wrapped his arms around me, gently lifting me to my feet. "Then let's not waste any more time," he whispered, his breath a warm breeze in my ear. We moved towards each other inside the house, the wooden floor creaking beneath us. Our mouths never parted as we searched for each other, his hands rediscovering every curve in my body. Places that had never been touched before felt like fire to me. Each sensation mixed with my breath in his mouth was like an explosion. Every contact with his skin was burning me with fire. When we stepped into the room, he gently pushed me against the door. Putting his hand on the zip of my dress, he slowly started to pull it down. The temperature between us rose as a cold air passed through my body. Then he took a step back and looked at me, embarrassed, and said, "You are so beautiful." His eyes were scanning each of my bare lines with such appetite that I felt both embarrassed and an inner shiver. "Thank you," I said, looking at him with those eyes. I reached out my hand to untie his shirt. As we undressed each other, we lost all the distance of years. At that moment, age didn't matter. Stripped of everything, we surrendered to each other completely. Every moment we lived, every touch was deeper. We met on the bed, our bodies wrapped around each other, the texture of the soft sheets contrasting with the hard desire between us. "Dave," I whispered, my voice shaking, "I need you." And at that moment he kissed me with an intoxicating passion. Each touch was gentle yet powerful, radiating a warmth that penetrated to the deepest corners of my soul. How long had it been since I had felt so wanted? How long had it been since a heart condemned to loneliness had awakened with such passion? Together, with our bodies moving in harmony, years of loneliness vanished. Only the sweet flavor of the moment remained. One morning I opened my eyes to find myself in her bedroom, the light filtering in through the window, illuminating every corner with a soft golden color, soothing. Expecting to find her beside me, I realized that the bed was cold. I sat up quickly and listened inside the house. I heard the sound of the shower on the wall and felt a little relieved. I quickly got out of bed, wrapped a thin blanket around me, and started preparing breakfast in the kitchen. Humming a slow song, I started the coffee machine, the eggs sizzling in the omelet. At that moment, the sound of the shower stopped. Smiling, I turned round and prepared to greet him, but the smile disappeared from my face as he entered the room. He was dressed in a comfortable t-shirt and trousers, his hair still damp, his computer bag in his hand. He was looking away from me, staring at the floor. "Dave?" I asked, an uneasiness starting to grow inside me. "Is something wrong?" He was silent for a long moment, then slowly raised his eyes and looked at me. There was a mixture of sadness and guilt in his eyes. "Lily," he said, his voice choked, "I can't keep doing this." My heart began to pound rapidly, like a weight had settled in the pit of my stomach. "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice barely audible. He took a deep breath, ruffling his hair. I thought I was ready, but..." My eyes welled up. It was like everything was turned upside down in that moment. "Dave, please," I said, my voice shaking. Don't do this. We can talk about everything." But he interrupted me with a slow shake of his head. "I'm sorry, Lily," he said. "I'm really sorry, but there's nothing I can give you. I can't do that much." Tears welled up in my eyes, and my heart was shattered. "So, that's it?" I said, my voice almost inaudible. "That's how you're ending everything between us?" He looked at me with a pained look in his eyes and took a deep breath. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm really sorry, but I can't be who you need me to be. I thought about it, but—" And with those words, he turned and walked out the door, leaving me alone in the kitchen, the air filled with the scent of loneliness, leaving only the silent echoes of the interrupted conversation. I stood there for a while, then collapsed and leaned against the cold floor. The cries coming from inside me intoxicated my body. It was difficult to accept what had happened, to understand the truth. As time went on, Dave continued to turn his back on me. He didn't show up for Pilates classes, ignored my messages, and didn't even look at me when we passed each other on the street. It was as if I was just a memory, a trace that should be left behind, and I had to somehow pull myself together. It was difficult, but I had to keep going because in the end, I was still here. I was still alive, and I didn't want anything more than to be loved the way I deserved by a man who could give me that.